The night Lorraine Ashford looked at Callum. No, not Callum. That name's taken. The night she looked across that restaurant table and said, "My daughter deserves someone who can actually provide for her." She had no idea she was talking to the man who would one day sign her eviction notice. She said it like it was nothing. Like he was nothing. Decker Price had heard worse. He'd heard it from his own father, back when he was 17. And working double shifts at a lumber yard outside Thunder Bay just to keep the lights on after his mother got sick. He'd heard it from his first boss, who told him warehouse workers don't get promoted, they get replaced. He'd heard it whispered at parent-teacher nights when other dads showed up in pressed suits and he showed up in a jacket with a frayed collar, because that was the best he had that year, and his daughter Wren needed new winter boots more than he needed to look polished. But Lorraine said it in front of Simone. That was the part he couldn't let go of. Simone Ashford was 34 years old and had spent most of her adult life trying to quietly, gently step out from under her mother's shadow without causing a scene. She was good at that, at absorbing things, at making a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and steering the conversation somewhere safer. She'd been doing it since she was a teenager in Oakville, when Lorraine would redecorate her bedroom without asking, or cancel plans Simone had made with friends because something more suitable had come up. Lorraine wasn't cruel, exactly. She was just certain. Certain about everything. Certain about what kind of neighborhood was worth living in, what kind of car said the right things, what kind of man was worth her daughter's time. Decker Price, as far as Lorraine was concerned, said nothing worth hearing. They had been dating for 4 months when Lorraine insisted on dinner. Simone had held off as long as she could, which told Decker something. She'd brought it up over the phone in a careful, hedging way. "My mother wants to meet you." "I know. It's soon. You don't have to if you're not ready." And he'd said yes without hesitating because he was 38 years old and he didn't have the energy to be afraid of a woman's mother anymore. He had a 9-year-old daughter at home. He ran a small demolition and salvage company that was quietly, steadily growing. He paid his taxes and coached Wren's soccer team on weekends and made a decent bolognese from scratch. He wasn't anyone's idea of impressive on paper maybe, but he wasn't nothing. Lorraine chose the restaurant. Of course she did. It was the kind of place in downtown Toronto where the menu didn't have prices on the women's copies, which Simone had mentioned once in a tone that suggested she found it charming, and Decker found mildly insane. He wore his good jacket. He got there early. He stood up when Lorraine walked in. She was in her early 60s, slim, carrying herself the way people do when they've been told their whole lives that they come from good stock. Her husband, Gerald Ashford, had died 6 years earlier and left behind a mid-sized property management company, Ashford Group, that Lorraine now chaired in a mostly ceremonial capacity, while her nephew, a man named Prescott who Decker would come to know well later, ran the day-to-day. She shook Decker's hand with the brisk efficiency of someone conducting an interview they'd already decided the outcome of. The first 20 minutes were almost fine. Lorraine asked about his work. He explained it plainly: demolition and salvage, reclaimed materials, a crew of 11, contracts mostly in the GTA and sometimes Hamilton. She listened with a fixed, polite expression. She asked about Wren. Where was her mother? And he said quietly that Wren's mother had passed away when Wren was 2. A rare cardiac event. Nobody's fault. Lorraine said she was sorry and moved on faster than felt decent. Then she asked what his 5-year plan was. He talked about expanding the salvage side of the business, getting into heritage restoration work, maybe bringing in a partner with architectural contacts. He was proud of it. It was real and it was growing, and he'd built it from nothing during the worst years of his life, while also raising a kid who had nightmares and separation, anxiety, and who once, memorably, cried at a school assembly because she thought she saw someone in the crowd who looked like the photos of her mother. Lorraine set down her wine glass. "I'm sure that's very admirable," she said, "but Simone is used to a certain kind of life. He has a condo in Rosedale. She travels. Her father worked very hard to give her options, and I don't think it would be fair to her, or to you, frankly, to overlook the practical dimension of what a serious relationship requires." Decker looked at her. Lorraine continued in the tone of someone being generous. "What I mean is, my daughter deserves someone who can actually provide for her, someone who's established, not someone still building." The table went quiet. Simone was looking at her water glass. Her jaw was tight. She didn't say anything, and later, much later, she would tell him that was the thing she was most ashamed of. Not her mother's words, her own silence. Decker picked up his fork, finished the bite he'd been about to take, and set it down again. "Simone," he said, "would you excuse us for a minute?" Simone looked up. "Decker, just to the bar. Get whatever you want. I'll settle up here with your mother in a sec." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she got up. He watched her walk away, and then he looked at Lorraine Ashford. "I'm not going to argue with you," he said, "but I want you to understand something. I've been broke. Actually broke, not drive a used car broke, but borrow money to fix the furnace before my daughter freezes broke. I've been there, and I climbed out of it, and I'm still climbing. That's not a warning sign. That's actually the whole story." Lorraine looked unmoved. "Your daughter is exceptional," he said, "and I think you know that. The question is whether you're protecting her or just controlling the view." He left $200 on the table. Too much, he knew, but he wasn't going to let her pick up the check, and went to find Simone at the bar. She was holding a glass of sparkling water with both hands. She didn't ask him what was said. She just looked at him and said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. "She doesn't speak for me." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm still here." What Lorraine Ashford didn't know about Decker Price, what almost nobody knew, because he was constitutionally uninterested in announcing things before they were done, was that he had been quietly acquiring something for the better part of 3 years. It had started as opportunism. A former client, a retired contractor named Brecht, who'd worked the same circles as Decker's father, had tipped him off about a distressed asset, a block of commercial property in Hamilton that an estate was trying to unload fast. Decker had the cash, barely, because he'd been living below his means since Wren was born, salting away everything the business threw off instead of upgrading his truck or moving into a bigger house. He bought the block. Then he sat on it, improved it incrementally with his own crew, and 18 months later sold it for nearly 3 times what he'd paid. He reinvested. He did it again. He was not a flashy operator. He didn't hire a financial advisor until the numbers demanded one. He didn't talk about it at the soccer field or at pickup. His accountant, a careful woman named Marguerite who had known him since the lean years, once told him he was the most financially disciplined person she'd ever worked with, and he'd said that it was easy to be disciplined when you remembered what it felt like not to have any. He meant it. By the time he met Simone, the real estate holdings were worth more than the demolition business. By quite a bit more. He hadn't told her yet because it felt complicated. Not because he was hiding it, but because he'd learned, from his late wife actually, who had been wise about money in a way he was still grateful for, that leading with money was a way of saying that money was the most important thing about you. He didn't want that. He wanted Simone to know the man before she knew the portfolio. Simone found out 3 months after the dinner with Lorraine, and not from him. She had mentioned, in passing, that Ashford Group was having a difficult year. Prescott, her cousin who ran the company, had made some aggressive acquisitions in the commercial sector that weren't performing. The interest rate environment had squeezed margins. There was talk of needing outside capital. Lorraine was stressed about it. It was the main thing Gerald had left behind, the living proof of his success, and the idea of diluting ownership or, worse, losing control, was apparently keeping her up at nights. Simone said all of this in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening, while Wren was doing homework at the table and Decker was making tea. She said it the way you mention something that's someone else's problem. Not asking for anything, just sharing. He didn't say anything. He put the kettle on. A week later, on the way home from dropping Wren at school, he called Marguerite. "Tell me what you know about Ashford Group," he said. "Publicly traded?" "No, private. Property management out of Oakville, mid-size. Gerald Ashford, deceased. Wife chairs nominally. Nephew is running it. Give me a few days." What Marguerite found was not pretty, but it was comprehensible. Prescott had bet heavily on a cluster of mixed-use, commercial developments in the Kitchener-Waterloo corridor at exactly the wrong time. The debt load was manageable if revenue held, but revenue wasn't holding. 2 anchor tenants had walked. A third was renegotiating. The company needed roughly $4 million in fresh capital to stabilize, or it would have to start selling assets, which, in the current market, would mean selling them at a discount, which would trigger more problems, which was the classic spiral. "Is it salvageable?" Decker asked. With the right injection and some operational restructuring, yes, Marguerite said. But whoever comes in is going to want real equity. Lorraine Ashford isn't going to like that conversation. What percentage would 4 million buy, ballpark? Marguerite told him. He sat with it for 3 days. He wasn't motivated by revenge. He wanted to be honest with himself about that, and he was fairly sure it was true. What he was motivated by was that this was a sound investment if managed correctly, that he had the construction and property knowledge to understand what was wrong and how to fix it, and that there was something quietly clarifying about the situation. He called his lawyer. He called Marguerite again. He made an offer through a numbered company, standard practice for him, not concealment, to provide bridge financing and a minority equity stake. Prescott, who was under enormous pressure and not in a position to be choosy, accepted within a week. The deal was done before Lorraine knew who she'd taken money from. Simone found out from Prescott, who called her on a Friday afternoon and said, in a voice she described later as the kind of careful that means he was already apologizing, that the investor who had rescued the company was a man named Decker Price. She was in her office at the architecture firm where she worked as a senior associate. She sat very still. "Simone," Prescott said, "how long have you known who he was?" "Since the term sheet." "I didn't know if you knew about his real estate side. He runs it through a numbered company. His lawyer was very straightforward about everything. I ran the diligence, everything checks out. He's clean." "Simone, the company needed." "I know the company needed it," she said. She sat there after she hung up, looking at the window. Outside, the city was doing what it did, moving, indifferent, gray-bright in late March. She wasn't angry with Decker. That was the thing she kept turning over. She wanted to untangle what she was feeling, and she couldn't find anger in it. Only something more complicated. A kind of vertigo. Like the ground had shifted into a shape she didn't expect, and she was recalibrating. The man her mother had written off as insufficiently established had just quietly bought a stake in her mother's company. Not to humiliate anyone. Not with a speech, not with a scene. He'd done it because it was a good investment, and he knew how to fix what was broken. That was, she thought, the most Decker thing imaginable. She drove to his house. It was the house he'd lived in since before Wren was born. Not a mansion, a well-kept semi-detached in East York that he'd renovated himself over the years, one room at a time. Wren had covered the side fence with chalk drawings last spring, and the outline of one was still faintly there, a series of stick figures holding hands under a sun with too many points. He was in the backyard when she arrived, stacking lumber. She let herself through the gate. He looked up, saw her face. "You talked to Prescott," he said. "Yes." He set down the board he was holding. "I should have told you." "You should have," she said. "I know." She looked at him. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. The way he got quiet was particular to him. Not evasive, not armoring up, just genuinely thinking. She'd learned to wait for it. "Because I didn't want you to think it was about your mother," he said. "It's a real investment. The numbers are there. Prescott's not a bad operator. He just made a bad bet, and the underlying assets are solid. I know how to look at a distressed property portfolio and know what's fixable. And my mother, I'm not doing it to prove anything to your mother. Then why does it feel like you are?" He took a breath. "Because she made you apologize for her, and you shouldn't have to, and maybe I wanted." He stopped. "No, that's honest, but it's not the whole story. It was a good deal, Simone. I would have taken it regardless." She believed him. She believed him because she'd seen him work, the way he walked job sites, the way he talked about materials and load-bearing structures, and what a building was actually worth versus what the market said. And she knew that mind didn't make emotional decisions with 7 figures at stake. "You have to tell her," Simone said. "I know. Before she finds out another way, you have to tell her yourself." "Yes," he said. "I'll do that. And Decker." She took a step toward him. "I'm not upset with you. I need you to know that. I needed to hear it from you." "I know," he said again, and this time it was softer. Wren appeared at the back door in her socks, which she was not supposed to be wearing outside. "Simone, are you staying for dinner?" "Dad said he's making the pasta." Decker looked at Simone. "Yeah," Simone said. "I think I'm staying for dinner." He called Lorraine himself. He didn't use a go-between. He didn't send a letter. He called her on a Sunday morning and said that he needed to speak with her, and when she said she was rather busy, he said it was about Ashford Group, and she went quiet, and then she said to come at 3. She lived in a house in Oakville that Gerald had bought in the 90s. Georgian brick, impeccably maintained, the garden still done according to the vision of a landscape architect who'd been retained for decades. Decker had been there once before, briefly to drop Simone off. He'd waited in the car. He didn't wait in the car this time. Lorraine met him at the door. She'd clearly spent the hours since the call arriving at some version of composure, but it was sitting on her like a coat that didn't fit. She was too controlled. She led him through to the sitting room and did not offer tea. "Prescott told me," she said, before he could speak. "I wanted to tell you myself," he said. "Why?" "Because it was a business decision made in good faith, and because I think you deserve to hear that from me directly." She looked at him. Her expression was not what he'd expected. He'd expected cold fury. What he saw was something more complicated. A woman in her 60s who had spent 40 years building a particular picture of the world, and who was watching one corner of it curl up. "You must find this very satisfying," she said. "No," he said. "I really don't." "You expect me to believe that." "I don't expect anything," he said. "I did a diligence review, the investment penciled out, and I can help stabilize the properties because I know what I'm doing with distressed commercial assets. That's the whole of it. And the fact that you're my daughters was not a factor in the financials," he said. "I would have done the same deal if we'd never met." She was quiet. Outside, a bird landed on the garden fence and departed. "Prescott says you want to bring in a property manager for the Kitchener corridor, a turnaround specialist." "Yes, someone who's handled anchor tenant renegotiations before. That's Gerald's portfolio." "I know," he said, and this time his voice was gentle. "I know it's his. I'm not going to dismantle it. I want to keep it viable." She looked at her hands. Something crossed her face that he didn't fully understand, but that felt private, and he let it be. "What do you want from me?" she said finally. "Nothing," he said. "I want the investment to perform. I want the company to survive. And," he hesitated, then continued because he'd decided to be honest, "I'm in love with your daughter. That's been true for a while. It's got nothing to do with this, but you might as well know." Lorraine looked at him for a long time. "She doesn't need my approval," she said, and it came out slightly strangled, like it cost her something. "No," he said. "She doesn't, but she wants it," Lorraine said very quietly. "She always has." He didn't answer that. It wasn't his to answer. He stood up and she stood up, and she walked him to the door. He was almost through it when she said, in a voice that was entirely different from any register he'd heard from her before, smaller and real, "She talks about the little girl, Ren. She says she's remarkable." He stopped. "She is," he said. "She'd like to know you." Lorraine didn't say anything, but she didn't close the door until he was down the steps and onto the path, and he counted that for what it was. In the months that followed, the Ashford Group stabilized. The turnaround specialist, Decker, brought in renegotiated 2 of the 3 anchor leases successfully. The third property was sold, strategically, at a price that actually worked in their favor, to a buyer Decker found through contacts in Hamilton. And the proceeds cleared the debt load. By the following spring, the company was profitable again. Not dramatically, not in a way that made headlines, but real and steady, the way healthy things usually are. Prescott called Decker at one point and said without preamble, "For what it's worth, I didn't know it was you when I took the meeting, but I'm glad it was you." Decker said thanks, and they talked about the leases for 20 minutes. And that was that. Simone's firm was commissioned to consult on the exterior rehabilitation of 2 of the Ashford properties. It had been her idea, a genuine professional fit, nothing orchestrated, and watching her walk a job site with a roll of drawings under her arm was one of the better things Decker had seen in a while. Ren turned 10 in August. They had a small party, friends from school, a few neighbors. Simone. Lorraine came. She arrived with a gift that was clearly something Simone had helped her choose. Something small and carefully chosen rather than expensive. And she sat in a lawn chair and watched Ren run around the yard with her friends, and she didn't say much. At one point, Ren came and sat next to her and said something. Decker was too far away to hear, and Lorraine laughed. Genuinely laughed. The kind that you can't plan. Decker watched it from across the yard and thought about his mother, who had worked herself half to pieces for 20 years, and never saw him get to this part. He felt that, briefly. Then Simone was beside him, handing him a piece of cake and saying something about how Ren had put her socks in the freezer as a prank, and wasn't that a thing she'd learned from somewhere. "Don't look at me," he said. You taught her that. I deny it, he said. She was laughing. He was looking at the yard, his kid and his house, and the improbable, hard-won, ordinary beauty of an afternoon that nobody could have predicted. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like he was still climbing. He felt like he was here.